Loki Season 2 is around the corner, and you are probably a very busy person who does not have time to rewatch 6 hours of the best Marvel Disney Plus show to ever exist. Or you're just someone who hasn't seen the show at all and finally decided to be cool and watch the show. Well, fear not, as I, Neo Nerds, am here with a recap video for you. I don't know how long this video will be, but I can assure you it's definitely less than 6 hours. Well, let's begin with episode 1. We start off with a recap of Loki's escape from captivity that we see in Avengers Endgame after Tony fumbled the Tesseract since he was yeeted by the Hulk. Then we see that Loki had teleported to the Gobi Desert in Mongolia and is captured by the Time Variance Authority, aka TVA. He is then processed through the TVA, where he and we see a video about the history of the TVA and the multiverse, presented by none other than Miss Minutes herself. Loki is then trialed for crimes against the sacred timeline, but Agent Mobius comes in and recruits Loki to help him hunt down another Loki variant. But before he does, he has a quick therapy session with Loki, showing him what would have happened in Loki's life had he not escaped with the Tesseract, such as the death of Frigga in the Dark World and his defeat against the Avengers and so on. Mobius is then called away to talk about a fallen unit of Minutemen when Loki tries to escape, and then realizes that the TVA is in fact the greatest power in the universe and not the measly Infinity Stone paperweights he had spent his entire life searching. He's then chased down by Hunter B-15, but Loki escapes back to the interrogation room and watches the rest of his life play out. He watches both the entire of Thor Ragnarok and his death in Infinity War and cries as he watches this. Mobius then arrives back in the interrogation room and Loki admits that he doesn't want to hurt people, but he only does it to hide his weakness, and he's now recruited to help catch his rogue variant who we see standing in a field of fire. We see that a team of Minutemen arrive at a Nexus event in 1985 Wisconsin to search for the rogue Loki variant. This team is then defeated with ease by that variant and the reset charge was stolen. Meanwhile, we see our Loki undergoing training to become a TVA agent with the assistance of none other than Miss Minutes herself. Loki and Mobius then head to that 1985 branch to see if there's any traces of the variant, and Loki is promised a meeting with the Timekeepers if he agrees to help them. Loki then starts stalling the TVA agents from pruning the timeline, but Mobius clocks this and stops Loki. Loki is then banished to the library as a result of his actions. Just kidding. He's there to do more research about this variant. He asks to see books about the creation of the TVA and at the end of time, but shock is restricted. Instead, Loki figures out how the variant is able to avoid capture, and that is by camping out at apocalyptic events. That way, nothing that was changed in that timeline would cause a Nexus event or a branch timeline, since that place is about to get destroyed anyway. And so Loki and Mobius and a squad of TVA agents head to 2050 Alabama, where a Category 9 hurricane is wiping out an entire town, which just so happens to be where the variant is hiding. The variant uses mind control and starts attacking Loki, before it being revealed that Loki variant was in fact a female variant known as Sylvie. She then bombs the entire sacred timeline using the reset charges she stole and leaves through a time door, and our Loki follows suit, leaving behind Mobius. It turns out that Sylvie was able to project and implant fake memories into people's heads, as she does with Hunter C-20, who revealed the location of the Timekeepers. The TVA, on the other hand, are dealing with the sacred timeline bombing, allowing Sylvie to simply walk right through the TVA unopposed, until right outside the Timekeepers' door stands Ravonna Renslayer, and then Loki opens a Tempad portal to some random planet. It just so happens that the Tempad has run out of charge, and so the two Lokis are stranded on a deserted moon called Lamentis 1. So the two decide to team up and try to find a power source on this moon that is set for destruction, so that they can return. They then meet this villager who attacks them at first, but then shows them the Ark, and the two board the train, where Loki gets poetic and then starts dancing and gets super drunk. And then the guards and the Lokis fight, since they don't actually have a ticket, and are thrown off the train. Sylvie then informs Loki that the TVA agents are all actually brainwashed humans that had passed before joining the TVA, and perhaps the TVA isn't all what it seems. Then at the Ark launch base, we see that the variants are fighting their way through to get onto the Ark, only for it to leave without them, and both Loki and Sylvie have accepted their fate. However, it turns out that fate wasn't ready to accept them. But before that, flashback time. We see that Sylvie was taken away from her timeline as a kid and is made to go through the entire trial process, and she witnessed the pruning of another variant, prompting her escape. Then in the present day, or is it on Lamentis, Loki and Sylvie start opening up to each other and hold hands, which itself causes a Nexus event because they start falling for each other, despite it being an apocalypse. And so the TVA capture them and take them both back to the TVA headquarters. Loki is then thrown into a time cell when just before he tells Mobius that he's being lied to by the TVA. And in said time cell, Loki gets slapped by Lady Sif many times. Loki then apologizes to Lady Sif for all of his actions. Mobius releases him from the cell and interrogates him about Sylvie, when Loki's true feelings for Sylvie come out, and then he tells Mobius about how he had a life before the TVA, and things are starting to get spicy on the show. Sylvie then shows Hunter B-15 her past before being a TVA agent. Mobius then sends Loki back to the time cell and goes to see Renslayer to celebrate the capture of the Lokis. And then he swaps out his Tempad with Renslayer's, in which he finds a video of Renslayer interrogating Hunter C-20, who was said to be dead. And Mobius realizes how bad stuff has become and frees Loki once more. And then Mobius is caught by Renslayer, who prunes him in front of a helpless Loki. Renslayer then retrieves Sylvie, and the three head to the Timekeepers. And the two variants team up and fight all the Minutemen, Renslayer, with the aid of B-15. Then Sylvie decapitates the Timekeepers, only to find out that they were in fact robots. And Loki is then pruned as he is about to admit his feelings to Sylvie. Sylvie then holds Renslayer at stake point. I already know what to call this. Demanding the truth. Then in the post-credit scene, we see Loki wake up with a void surrounded by 4 variants. And yes, that is a freaking alligator Loki. In the penultimate episode, we see Loki in the void surrounded by fellow Lokis, but all of different shapes, sizes, and even species, and they're all on the run from Alioth, a massive cloud demon thingy in the void. Meanwhile, Sylvie interrogates Renslayer, who is just as clueless as Sylvie, and Sylvie realizes that the only way to find answers was to prune us. Our Loki is trying to return to the TVA to put an end to this and also try and find Sylvie, but this idea is shut down by the others. They then find a hatch which leads to a bunker, and in this bunker we see the Lokis socializing, talking about the Nexus event, when they are rudely interrupted by President Loki and an army of Loki variants. Whilst all of this is happening, Sylvie is met up with Mobius and is driving a car towards Alioth in an attempt to find Loki, the main one. Back at the bunker, we see that boastful Loki sold out the location of the 4 variants to President Loki, who also happens to be deceiving boastful Loki, too many Lokis, which creates an all-out brawl. And classic Loki, Kid Loki, Loki, and Alligator Loki escape and meet up with Mobius and Sylvie, and they hatch a plan to face Alioth. Renslayer then interrogates a captive B-15, asking more about Sylvie's motives. Loki and Sylvie then share a blanket and prepare for the fight against Alioth. Sylvie then hands Loki a tempad, who then hands this to Mobius, and both Lokis decide to fight Alioth head on. Mobius then vows to destroy the TVA, and that Kid Loki and Alligator Loki decide to peace out. Classic Loki then decides that he has had a long life and distracts Alioth with illusions, and sacrifices himself in the process. Sylvie then makes contact with Alioth and manages to neutralize him, revealing a citadel at the end of time. Sylvie and Loki enter the Citadel at the end of time, only to be greeted by the one and the only. Now, you've been waiting for this. It's Miss Minutes. She then tempts the variants with a place back on the sacred timeline, and they get to live out their dream lives. However, they refuse and head towards and meet He Who Remains, the real creator of the TVA. Miss Minutes then heads back to Renslayer, who was going through some files, and Renslayer informs her that these are not the files that she requested, to which Miss Minutes cryptically says that He Who Remains thinks that she's better off with these files instead. Mobius then arrives in Renslayer's office, where she says the normal waffle that all villains say, that she had no choice when she had to prune Mobius. Mobius says that all of the Minutemen all know about their life before the TVA, and Hunter B-15 lures a group of Minutemen to 2018 Ohio, where we see that Renslayer was a teacher before joining the TVA, and then we see Renslayer leave through a time door, and we don't see her again until season 2. Meanwhile, in the lift with He Who Remains, Sylvie tries to attack it. He Who Remains explains his backstory of how he was a scientist in the 31st century who discovered multiversal travel and decided to interact with his variants. Naturally, that led to a power struggle, and after the big multiversal war, He Who Remains was the victorious one. And he explains that the sacred timeline is essential to keeping his variants, like Kang, out, stopping another multiversal war. Then He Who Remains reveals that they've passed the threshold, and he has no knowledge of what happens beyond this point. He then offers the Lokis an ultimatum: either kill him and risk a multiversal war, or continue control of the TVA for generations to come. Sylvie, who had always felt oppressed by the TVA, lunges forward to kill He Who Remains, but Loki, who realizes the risk, tries to talk Sylvie out of it, who wasn't having any of it. The two then start fighting whilst arguing, and He Who Remains sits there watching. Sylvie then kisses Loki and opens a time door and blasts him through it. She then turns around and kills He Who Remains, and we see the sacred timeline unravel behind him. We then see Loki back at the TVA crying because of Sylvie's betrayal, and the multiversal war is about to ensue. We then see Mobius and B-15 looking at a screen where we see all these branch timelines unraveling from the sacred timeline, and Loki then goes to see them, only for them to not know who he is. Loki turns and sees a massive statue of Kang the Conqueror in the place where the Timekeeper statue stood. Now, this is pretty much where season 2 will start from, and it's a pretty huge cliffhanger, and we will definitely see more of Kang and He Who Remains and all these variants, even though we did see him in Quantumania, but that movie is as good as not having seen it.